We are live now, sir. We'll wait for the number of participants to reach.
Yep.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone around the world. We've reached the maximum number of participants here on Zoom. The rest of the participants who register will be redirected to the Facebook page of KFCRI. So first, a very warm welcome to Mr. Christopher To, Mr. Shanmuga Dev, and Mr.V.Inbavijayan. I'll be the host for today. So a brief introduction about KFCRI. Kovise Foundation Conflict Resolution International is set up out of Chennai, India. It has two wings majorly. One is an accreditation body or a training body. We provide accreditations in all the fields of ADR such as arbitration, mediation, conciliation, and even to be a tribunal secretary. Apart from this, we are also an ADR institution in itself. So we have our own rules in, again, all the fields of ADR, where our clauses can be incorporated into your contracts, where we will take up any dispute arising out of such contract and resolve it. Thank you. A small housekeeping instruction. You can find, the participants can find the Q&A box down below. If you have any questions through the course of this webinar, you can please raise your questions there. And at the end, when there's the time for Q&A, that is the last 15 minutes, we'll try to answer most of the questions. Thank you. Mr. Inbavijayan, if you'd like to introduce our speaker.
Yeah. Good afternoon and good evening to all. It is a privilege to introduce Dr. Christopher To. Dr. Christopher is actually the chairman of Hong Kong Institute of Directors, the past chairman of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators East Asia branch, as well as the advisory board member of KFCRI. Interestingly, for a decade, I think during 1998 to 2008, he was the Secretary General of Hong Kong International Arbitration Center, wherein a very popular arbitration institution and a very effective arbitration hub in Far East, which is predominantly administering all type of institutional arbitration, not only arising out of Hong Kong or the Far East nations, more particularly the mainland China cases. Very interesting, it's very active institution, wherein Mr. Christopher Tu was the pioneer to promote this arbitration institution between 1998 and 2008. Further, very interestingly, a couple of days back, he has been re-elected as a member of the committee of East Asia branch of Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. I, as well as on behalf of KFCRI, make a warm welcome to Dr. Christopher. Welcome.
Morning, good afternoon, and also good evening.
Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Swetan, for such a sweet introduction. Good day to all the attendees and the panelists. And I thank KFCRI for giving me such a wonderful opportunity for having me as a moderator in this wonderful session with the globally celebrating media practitioner, Dr. Christopher Tu. And Doctor, would you like to give some introductory remarks?
Okay, I would like to thank the organizers and also the three speakers with me today. I know some of you, it's a holiday. I appreciate that. But at the end of the day, I think we're very keen on the learning and also continuous professional development. And the institution, KFCRI, are very interested in terms of your participation in the events as well.
Thank you, Doctor. Like, before I consume so much time, I'll just open my Q&A and I'll ask my first question, Doctor. Doctor, the spirit of mediation is settling the dispute in a win-win situation. Doctor, do you think all the disputes referred to a mediation can be settled in a win-win situation?
I don't think all disputes can be settled in a win-win situation. The reason being, it depends on the participants, whether they are committed, whether they're willing to settle. Because at the end of the day, they always believe that they have a good argument, they've got a good case. But then once they realize the reality of things and they come down to when they look at the money side, they realize, for example, maybe they need another way of actually resolving much more quicker. and they tend to use mediation because why? It's quick, and it's cheap, relatively cheap compared to litigation and arbitration. And also the key thing is most people look at mediation is the ongoing relationships. Some people believe that we need to maintain these relationships because the community is very small. But in certain cases, parties will test the water to see whether this will work. If not, then they go back to arbitration or litigation. So win-win situation only applies when both parties are really willing to give it a try. If they're willing to give it a try and they're committed to it, the chances are they will be able to achieve a win-win situation. But of course, some disputes you cannot have a win-win situation. You only have a win-lose situation because some disputes are more geared towards litigation and arbitration.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for bringing this clear-cut picture. Doctor, I'll just move on to my next question, Doctor. Doctor, I still remember you saying that in one of your fond memories that in school, which you came as a loss as a student, and later you became the chairman of the same school. And the catalyst for such a transformation is the quality of never giving it up. And Doctor, what are the qualities and skills of a good mediator must have, especially those commercial mediators, Doctor?
I think the qualities of a mediator, basically what you need to have is you have to have very good listening skills. You don't have to prejudge someone. So if someone tells you something, you don't actually assume they're telling you a lie or they're telling you the truth. But you take things with a pinch of salt. You look at it from a different perspectives. You try to be patient. You try to be much more sort of, how should I say, helping parties, how should I say, like a sponge, okay? Whenever they are unhappy, you try to comfort them. And whenever, for example, they need support, you're there to support them. On top of that, the key thing is, one area that I would like to emphasize is option generating. You're there to create options for the parties. You're there to suggest options for them to actually buy into or to agree, because at the end of the day, there's various modes of mediation, and I tend to use the facilitator mode because facilitator mode, you're facilitating the parties to negotiate. Other modes, you tend to evaluate. And if you evaluate, the chances are you come into the situation we discussed earlier. Once you evaluate, you're actually siding with one party, and that could be a win-lose situation, which you lose trust with the parties. So I think the key thing is helping them generate options, ideas, be patient, good at rephrasing words from negative to neutral, as well as, for example, challenging them sometimes to say that, are you sure if you want to go to litigation? Do you know how much it costs? Are you prepared for it? Is your case strong enough? Tell us more about your case. So those are the things, that kind of questions you're going to ask. And I noticed that Joe Kelly has asked a question here. Do you consider mediation should be compulsory step before proceeding to arbitration litigation? I always believe that you cannot force someone to do mediation. Okay, we have many sort of mandatory mediation before arbitration. If you try to mandate something, the chances are people think it's going through the motions. I think if you make it mandatory, they'll feel, for example, I have to go through the step, but I don't have to settle through the step. But if you make it, for example, voluntary, the chances are both parties are looking at this and say that we need to try this. If this doesn't work, then we have a fallback mechanism. So I always believe voluntary way of doing things works much better than compulsory or mandatory. I hope that addresses Joe Kelly's point. Okay. Another question is, we request all attendees to raise questions in the Q&A box, not in this chat box. Oh, doesn't matter. Okay.
Yes, Doctor.
That's your colleague, isn't it?
Yes, Doctor. Yes, Doctor. Yeah. Thank you for such valuable information, Doctor. I'll just move to the next question, Doctor. My next question is, it is more kind of a specific question. Doctor, it is true that institutional mediations play an explicit role in the commercial mediation sector. Example, if you take Kovise Foundation Conflict Resolution International, it has such a good governing and requisite system. And in your opinion, what are the qualifications that the institutions should look for when inducting a mediator?
I think, are you looking at when an institution should be appointing a mediator in terms of the qualities? I think the key thing is you have to look at, for example, the substance of the contract, the background of the parties, the background of the mediator, as well as his skill sets in certain areas. I think most parties who've gone through mediation will actually rate the mediator in terms of their qualities. What is this mediator good at? Is he good at, for example, being a bit decisive? He actually has a lot of options. Does he put the parties at ease? All these kind of questions. Basically, some of the in-house lawyers will try to rate a mediator, and guess what? You as an institution will have to look at these attributes or characteristics of this mediator to see whether these match the current case on hand. By just purely looking at the facts and what the parties have submitted, you're not really doing justice to the whole process. You need to match the person to the other persons, as well as the facts and evidence of the case, so that basically you can get the best fix or best how should I say, relationship going. That's very important. There's a few questions. Should I answer those while I go along?
Doctor, can you answer it in the last 15 minutes as we'll finish the interaction?
Okay.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. Doctor, in line with it, I'll just ask my next question. We have so many undergraduate students among the attendees. So I just want to ask one generic question for them, representing them. So what could the undergraduates and the students who are inclined towards mediation do to develop their profile? What are the opportunities available to them?
I think the opportunities are they have to follow mediators, the ones who have been accredited or certified. The reason is because you're providing a service. You're providing a service to parties, and the service has to be of some standard. And if the standard is not there, parties will be disillusioned with the whole process. So what you need to do is you need to follow a person, just like a pupil master and a pupil. You follow a person, get to know his skill sets or her skill sets. What does he do in certain situations? How can he talk people out of it? And so forth. Then you learn and write it down. So next time when you try cases yourself, you remember that he adopted this strategy. He adopted this process. So I'm going to use it now to test the water. So that's one thing, because I always believe in you learn a lot from, for example, university. But at the end of the day, you need to put it into practice. Theory basically doesn't work with parties in real life. They all want the solutions. What are the solutions? What's the practical solution moving forward? So that's one thing. Another thing is there are many community-related mediations or even, for example, disputes in the community. Whether they're small or big, it doesn't matter. But the key thing is you have a lot of student unions or student members. You basically have committees in universities. Why don't you create a clinic, a mediation clinic, whereby you train up your would-be lawyers or would-be mediators, and you basically say to them that you're going to handle small disputes, like, for example, arguments over whether, for example, whether you did something or didn't do something in the university, and this could be actually handled with these semi-trained mediators or lawyers, basically who'll be able to actually handle the matter. Now, I must emphasize, why do I mention lawyers? You don't have to have the qualification of law to practice mediation, because I've seen many good mediators who are basically not very good in the legal aspects, because they haven't been trained, they're not qualified in that area. But in humans, interactions, they'll be able to actually move mountains. So in a way, it really boils down to practice. If the person basically is committed, he will be able to actually learn the skills very quickly, he will become a good mediator. So the chances are it is a skill you can use at work, it's a skill you can use at home, it's a skill you can use in the community, and above all, if you come out to practice, whether as a lawyer or non-lawyer, you'll be able to resolve business or even community disputes or family disputes.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for such insightful information. Doctor, I'll just move to the next question. As lawyers, arbitrators, and even judges do their homework after the hearings, and what you expect, what type of homework would a mediator have after his hearings? And adding in line to that, how should one master the simultaneous note-taking with the oral communication skill, as this is one of the important skills, in mediation?
I think the key thing is, most people believe that when I'm doing mediation, I come with a fresh mind, okay? But in saying that, parties do have, if you want to use the legal term, pleadings, and documents submitted, and they've actually had sort of exchange of documents before they appointed the mediator. So clearly, if the parties give you those documents, you as a mediator, you have a duty to understand what is the issues the parties have arguments over, and what is the crux of the matter. You don't have to look at the legal aspects because the lawyers are very good at that. All you need to do is look at what are they trying to argue? Why is he trying to say this and why is she trying to say that? So the chances are, yesterday I did a mediation and the parties were talking about, for example, some of the issues. I quickly went to the files and said, this is the document you're referring to. And both parties looked at me and says, he's read the files. So that's very important because at the end of the day, if you're not familiar with the case and you just say, I come here with a clean mind and you tell me what's happening. So they spend 2 hours explaining things to you and you suddenly realize, can you explain this? Can you explain that? And what will happen is they become disillusionized and also they get frustrated. They believe that, for example, are you really helping us? Are you here just to listen to what we've got to say? Okay, so the whole thing is you are supposed to be geared up from day one in terms of assisting the parties. That's very important. And the key thing is about some people are very aggressive in terms of how they speak and all that. In mediation, okay, it's unlike advocacy. In mediation, you have to be much more laid back. Laid back, and you have to test the water. What's this person like? Are they more soft-spoken? Are they more hard-nosed? If they are more hard-nosed and all that, you have to control them. Even though, for example, you can't dictate to them what to do, you can control them and say to them, now, remember, we're here to facilitate. Remember, we're here to have dialogue. So chances are, if you attack the other side or give them a hard time, the chances are, do you think they're going to open up and discuss things with you? End of the day, remember, you want a solution. So if you want a solution, make sure you get the solution that you want by actually cooperating. Cooperation is the key. So I think that's very important. And I think the mediator has to do is build rapport. That's very important. So I get to know you, you get to know me, and actually, and also, for example, have trust. Now, when I do mediations or go to court or litigations or arbitrations, I can tell you, mediation to me is much more tiring. So by the time I finish a mediation on that day, the next day, basically I don't go back to work because I'm so tired. Because there's so much brain power you have to think. So much, for example, moving about, shuttle mediation, moving from different rooms, trying to understand their emotions, trying to look at the facts, separating the emotions from the facts. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Doctor, definitely, Doctor. Thank you so much. And thank you for bringing out the importance of a mediator doing his or her homework like after the mediation. In line with that, I'll just put a more type of a comparative question. This is like a comparative between an arbitration and a mediation. Doctor, the question is, unlike in arbitration where you have the final award, in mediation you can bring it to the settlement agreement. But you see, Doctor, it does not have the enforceability authority than that of an arbitral award. Doctor, does this make arbitration better than the mediation? As a commercial mediator, and what is your opinion on that?
Now, that's why United Nations was very instrumental in putting forward this sort of convention, the Singapore Convention on the settlement of cross-border mediations involving different parties from different jurisdictions. Now, for domestic, we still don't have that process, but for international, we do have it. So in a way, a convention, just like the New York Convention on the reciprocal enforcement of arbitral awards, we'll have one for mediation. So for domestic, in Hong Kong, we do have a law whereby you can convert. It's just like, for example, a settlement agreement. It's just like a consent award. You can convert that to a consent award. Now, of course, some jurisdictions say, for example, a consent award is not enforceable because it does not have a decision-making process. Understand, this is about theory, how you argue the case when you try to not enforce it or you try to enforce it. At the end of the day, if the parties have agreed to it and they just want some kind of binding agreement, the chances are they're not going to breach that agreement again, because at the end of the day, they know, for example, if they breach it, they have to fall back into arbitration. So if they've agreed to something, the chances are they're going to stick with the agreement to make sure they do it so they don't have the consequences of spending more money and time going through another process to resolve whether what they've agreed and whether someone's done something or not done something according to the settlement agreement. So I think give it time. So far in Hong Kong, most people, once they come into a settlement agreement, they tend to honor that settlement agreement. Because I tend to, as a mediator, another thing you have to do is you try to actually, even though you finish your job, you delivered. But at the end of the day, you sometimes send an email back to the lawyers and ask them, did the other party honor it? Did they actually fulfill it? And usually the solicitors will come back and say to you, yes, we've done it. The case is now closed, finished. So in a way, you have actually done from the start to the finish, and you've actually closed the whole case. That's very important. There's no point you doing mediation and suddenly realize that 10 out of 10 your cases, basically what happens is the settlement has a problem and that no one has actually honored the settlement agreement.
Okay,
You're
Doctor.
not successful. You're not successful in that if you do that. Because at the end of the day, the parties haven't honored it. So the chance that you've agreed a settlement agreement, maybe they decided to agree to it on that day, but they haven't honored the settlement agreement. That could be a big problem as well.
Yes, Doctor, I completely second that. And I'll just put my next question, Doctor. And thank you for like such a giving a clear description on this comparison. And Doctor, and on one side, we were expecting online mediations, we can take it as an online area, to be the forerunner in the dispute resolution process, especially during this lockdown, and we might expect even after this lockdown. Doctor, now there is a need for balancing both the technology and audio as well. Now you were the chairman of Hong Kong Internet Domain, and now you also serve as a chairman of Hong Kong Institute of Directors. And I think it would be more precious if I ask you this question. Like, you are the man of experts in both the fields. Doctor, how effective is this process in assisting the parties' need, underlying the dispute between the parties, considering that they're not here in person by the mediator?
I think online, ODR, if you want to call it ODR, I have always been pushing for ODR. ODR is, I would say, is more suitable for litigation and arbitration. Some of you might doubt that in terms of, for example, you need to look at their witnesses, etiquette, his demeanor, and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, a good advocate will test the waters to an extreme to find out whether someone is telling the truth or not telling the truth. Now, with mediation, it's slightly a bit of a problem, because at the end of the day, remember when we are taught mediation, we have to look at their facial expressions, their demeanor, and how they sit, whether the hands are moving, and so forth. And online, you can't really see that, whether you feel someone is nervous, whether they are not willing to speak up because someone said a certain word. It's difficult to do that. But with technology, I believe, okay, eventually it will come. So you can, unless I move my hands up like this, you can't see my hands. So chances are, with technology, it will come. But we have to be aware of. Remember Mission Impossible? Remember Tom Cruise?
Yes.
When he was going past this of a corridor where there was two Russian guards at the end of it, and he put a screen, and basically he moved the screen very close to them, and the two Russian guards could not see anyone on the corridor. Eventually, he came up to them and hit them on the head. So you can see that you can trick the camera, you can trick things. But if we develop a system whereby, for example, it's foolproof, there's lots of procedures in place, lots of protocols that everyone has to follow, and all this has been tested, the chances are online dispute resolution will happen whether you like it or not, because the younger generation are all into smartphones, iPads, you name it. So chances are eventually it will come. But the key thing about it for mediation is, I think for now, if both parties are sincerely committed to resolving the disputes, whether you do ODR or whether face-to-face, they're going to sit down and resolve their own disputes. But only those disputes whereby people are just using the process because their contract stipulated they must do it, the chances are whether you use ODR or face-to-face, it might not render a result. But the key thing is the technology. If the technology providers can come up with a system whereby, keyword again, I like to use the word trust. People trust it. People can use it. People know that if they go into a private session with one party, no one else is going to hear what they're going to say. Now, one of the things about ODR is, as one of the clients mentioned to me, is they're worried because ODR, you can record it. So if you're in control of it, you can record it. So basically what you can do is when you're doing a mediation, eventually that recording, you can actually share with other people. Now, the good thing about it is it's recorded. There's voice. Sometimes there's transcripts as well. So the young lawyers don't have to be like us in court. When you go to court, take down notes anymore, because end of the day, once the whole thing is finished, you can just print it and the whole transcript comes out exactly word for word what was said in the whole mediation or even arbitration. So chances are certain costs will be saved. And also one key thing that I did a seminar a few days ago with a Malaysian sort of law firm. There was one thing that we mentioned about is the connections, okay? The bandwidth and all that stuff. That's very important. The week before, I was talking to someone in your part of the region, and he said to me, it works better if we use Microsoft Teams, but if we don't have our faces shown, so we just have voice. And we tried to use our faces, and guess what happened? The whole thing crashed, and I couldn't understand what they were saying. So when we stopped the video and just focused on speaker phone, even though we're using Microsoft Teams, it worked perfectly. So the bandwidth is very important, as well as for example, the internet connection. Whether it's stable, whether it's secure, and all this kind of thing. Because at the end of the day, whether ADR, most people talk about the keyword confidentiality. So how do we ensure that there's no leakage of information, that we breach certain laws or certain rules, or we get into trouble? I hope that answers your question very quickly.
Yes, Doctor, definitely. And thank you. This answer is giving us a definite solid hope that definitely an ODR has a hope in bright future. Doctor, and my next question is, it's regarding more of a specific question. It relates to drafting a settlement agreement. Doctor, in practical scenario, we have three pictures. Imagine three pictures. The first picture, the mediators solely drafts a settlement agreement. In another scenario, where a mediator with the help of a party's counsel draft a settlement agreement. And we do have a third scenario in which the party counsel drafts a settlement agreement and it comes to the center of the mediator. My question will take to the first picture here, Doctor. If a mediator who's fully responsible for drafting a settlement agreement, and as a commercial mediator, what points he must keep in mind while drafting the mediation settlement agreement, Doctor?
I think that there are quite a few. If you're a lawyer, you need to know, for example, if there's a breach of the settlement agreement, you need to know which jurisdiction you have to actually argue this case in. So if you say that the law is, for example, in India, the chances are then you have to state that if there's any disputes, maybe the High Court of India will have jurisdiction to hear this dispute. So I think that's very important. The other one is, for example, what we call an entire agreement clause. That means, for example, everything discussed in the whole mediation is now included into this agreement. This agreement is final, and that's what is put down. And there's also, for example, the responsibilities, very important as well. One key thing is, if there's money involved, when do you need to pay the money by? What happens if there's a default? If one party doesn't pay, do you sue them straight away, or do you take action, or do you give them more time? Another thing is, you get the parties' names correct, whether those are the right parties. That's why when you're doing mediation, you have to be very careful. Do the parties have the authority to settle this matter? Are they the right people that are coming to the table? If they're not, the chances are you can have problems. So those are the three overriding issues that you need to include. But going back to my previous question, if I may, you talked about ODR. Now, yes, India. If you look at India, the number of, I was just looking at Google a few minutes ago, India has the largest number of IT specialists. So clearly you lot can develop some kind of ODR much more effective than other people around the world. If you put your minds, talk to lawyers, work together, you can actually get a system going very quickly. So does that answer your question when you're drafting a settlement agreement?
Yes, Doctor, definitely.
Of course, there's more terms. Okay, most people will argue, of course, it depends on the contract, the agreement between the parties, the issues in dispute, and also, for example, if it involves, for example, subsidiaries or involves a professional relationship, like, for example, an association, there's different terms. Most law firms have different standard templates that you can actually hear. I tend to like to get the lawyers involved. Because if you don't, because I'm a lawyer myself, even though I started off being an engineer, if you do away with the lawyers, what will happen is, I say we can do this ourselves. We can get the mediator to do it themselves. Do you think lawyers are going to be more convincing to convince clients to use mediation? First of all, no, because they'll deal with their livelihood. Secondly is, what happens if the party's rights have not been looked at very carefully? So the key thing is everyone wants to have a righteousness. The chances are if you have your lawyer sitting beside you in the mediation, then the mediator can say, now this is a legal point. Maybe your lawyer can help you with this point. In a way, the lawyer does have added value. Added value in the sense that you're advising your client. When it comes to settlement, you're advising the right terms. So basically, at the end of the day, you will not come to the situation whereby you will not, or the other side will not honor the obligations under the settlement agreement. So in a way, you've had people look at it very carefully and so forth. Of course, the mediator can draft it, okay? I can draft it, okay? I can draft some of, I think there's 2 of my students who are now on this seminar, and they'll tell you, I know how to draft it, okay? But the key thing is, I can draft it, but the problem is you have to make sure that you get everyone involved. If you get everyone involved and everyone knows their role in society, in this situation, mediation, the chances that mediation will take off. If you just confine it to a certain sector and deal with other sectors, the chances are, why would people try to promote this sector of mediation? That's very important. So you have to embrace it, okay? And you have to, for example, very, very important, look after the rights of your clients. Make sure your client is fully aware of the case from a legal standpoint. If it especially involves cross-border disputes, you have to look at it from the legal sort of a jurisdiction on the other side and your side. Even though you put down the contract, it could be Indian law, but if the other side is from, say, Hong Kong, they might be looking at it from a Hong Kong law. So you have to explain what Indian law says. So all these kind of things.
Thank you, Doctor. If that is all, can I move to the next question, Doctor?
Pardon?
If your answer is over, can I move to the next question, Doctor?
Yes, go on to the next question.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor. Doctor, this is more like a kind process question in a mediation. That is type is a shuttle mediation. Doctor, in shuttle mediation, we have this system like where one of the parties talk to the mediator privately and ask the mediator to convey the message to the other party. You know, and as a mediator, he takes up his role and he rephrases the message before conveying to the other party. Like rephrasing or reframing plays a very crucial role in this situation, you know. And in that scenario, what are the factors that mediator should be very conscious enough while reframing it?
I think you cannot, when you're reframing it, you have to reframe it from a neutral standpoint. Because if you do it in a private meeting and one party says, can you convey this over to the other side? The chances are you're not going to say, for example, if the person says, just tell him I hate his guts, but I'm going to agree to settle. So do you go back to the other side and say, by the way, the other side say they hate your guts? So you're not going to do direct communication straight away like that. You're going to say, for example, you might skip that point about he hates your guts and just focus on, for example, the other issue. So you have to pick your words carefully because you do not want to upset the other side, but you do not want to give them the impression that you're just the mouthpiece of the other side conveying it over to you. So you need to frame it in a way that they like to hear. I'll give you an example. I always say to people, if you're a male or female, or especially females, I'm not sexist, but I'm saying this, but if you go to a female and say to a female, you're really ugly, do you think she's going to be very happy with you? But if you say, wow, your dress is wonderful, it's great. So then she smiles. Then what happens is you try to ask a second question. She's willing to answer the question to you. So same with gentlemen as well. So if you try to talk to them in a way, for example, they feel comfortable, they're happy with what you're going to say, what will happen is they're going to open up. The key thing is opening up. So I think that's very important. I think you as a mediator, you need to open up people. Don't be biased. That's very important because your words, whatever you say, and that's why it's difficult compared to litigation and arbitration, especially acting as counsel. You can say whatever you like. And if you don't like, if the other side objects to it or the judge objects to it, you just say, I rephrase the question. But in mediation, once you've said it, how can you take it back and rephrase it? Impossible, because in people's mind, you've already had this perception or this kind of stance that you're favoring the other side. So I think that's very important. So you have to do more work. in terms of, for example, think before you speak type of attitude.
Thank you, Doctor. Just summarizing it, Doctor said the most important factors are such as being open up and thinking before what we speak, or some of the important factors that a leader should really be conscious enough while we frame it. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. That was really an experienceable information. You know,
I was trying to be much more direct, saying, for example, about a female, but chances are you get my point. Okay, when you say something negative to someone, people don't like it. People like to be around people who are very positive, cheery, upbeat, and all that stuff, because at the end of the day, life is too short. You don't want to be too near people who are complaining all the time. If you're near people that are complaining all the time, it's not very good for your health as well.
Yes, Doctor. Thank you. And Doctor, I'll just put my next question to you. Doctor, you know, mediation is really kind of an artistic skill. To be more precious, it is an art to extract significant information underlying one's interest. In such scenario, mediator's role lies with understanding the root of the dispute from which the parties conveys to each other or between them and or himself. Then how does a mediator master that art, the art of underlying the one's interest, underlying the root of the dispute?
I think what you need to do is, that's why you have a lot of questioning techniques. You ask them a question, you keep on asking them from different angles and so forth. Eventually you understand where they're coming from, what is their bottom line. In mediation, I think that there's a Harvard Law School who basically invented this and getting to yes. BATNA and WATNA, and also the zone of possible agreement. So those are the things that you have to be looking at. What is people's BATNA? Best alternative to negotiate agreement. WATNA is the worst alternative to negotiate agreement, and the ZOPA, Z-O-P-A, is basically the zone of possible agreement. So in a way, you're sitting there trying to actually understand where they're coming from. Is this their bottom line? Because most people will tell you, that's my bottom line, final offer. But do you think it's the final offer? How do you know it's the final offer? So you might want to test it. You might want to actually make sure, am I going to test this? How am I going to test this? The only way to test this is you basically do your homework up front, understand from the documents whether there is any offers provided previously. If there is, the chance that if it's the same offer, clearly they're not really sincere in terms of giving you the offer. But if it's a different offer, is this the bottom line? You ask them more questions. What happens if you don't get this? The other side can't pay you. What are you going to do? You're going to go take them to arbitration or litigation? Chances are, if they can't pay you up front, can you pay in installments and all that stuff? So you're asking a lot of questions. And those are sometimes we call the probing questions. Because they're very pertinent, important, because why? You want to get to the bottom of things. You want to make sure that you've tested the water to make sure that both parties will have a meeting of minds. Their minds are meeting together. Okay, if not, if it's all one-sided, the other side feels, for example, imbalance of power, and the chances are what will happen is they're just going to walk away and not do this mediation.
Yes, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor. Doctor, since we have so many young minds and students as well among the attendees, I just want to ask you one general question is that, what are the qualities or the skills they must develop while being a student to become a good commercial mediator?
I think the mind frame that you use in terms of advocacy as a counsel should be different. Because as counsel, you are asking, you're always basically using direct questioning, if you want to use that phrase, direct questioning. In mediation, you have to use open-ended questions. So you have to be like, if you call this witness and you do examination in chief, you have to use a lot of open-ended questions. You can't use direct questioning. You can only use that in cross-examination or sometimes maybe in re-examination. But chances are, in mediation, you have to have a lot of open-ended questions, not the answers like yes or no. You have to ask them questions whereby they can actually have much more options of generating further ideas through their answers. So that's very important. Another thing is, don't treat it as, for example, you have to follow a script. Now, most people, when they do advocacy, I've seen it, okay? When I do advocacy, most people say, but you don't have a script of questions to ask, because I've already understood the whole case. So I roughly know, all I put down is bullet points and a piece of paper so that I know that when I hit this bullet point, I've asked that question. So, but I've seen some advocates, you put down questions, they ask question 1, then they move on to question 2, then they move on to question 3A or 3B or 3C, depending on the results or what the other side has said. That's good as well, but in mediation, if you do it that way, it's prescriptive. It's just like acting. Everything is all following a motion. Chance that in mediation, everything happens differently. Sometimes people cry in front of you, and what do? Suddenly, you have to react. Like, for example, you don't give them a tissue paper straight away, because if you do that, the other side might not be happy. So you say to the other side, by the way, there is a box of tissues on this table. What should I do with it? The other side seems to be a bit upset here. And the person basically give her a tissue box, give her some tissue papers. Then the way you haven't judged by just giving a tissue paper, you've actually asked the other side, what should I do? Got it now? So it's open-ended questions more.
Okay, doctor. I think Doctor will. I think we gave really a good interaction. I'll just move to the Q&A box and I'll just open it. Doctor, we have a question from.
Should I read it out? Should I read them all out, and after them we answer one at a time?
Yes, doctor. I'll read the question. Yeah, you answer.
Okay. You decide which question.
Doctor, there's a question from C.M. Heng. Sorry, pardon me if I'm pronouncing it wrong. This question is, what are the challenges that you have ever faced while conducting a mediation proceeding?
The challenges I've ever faced was when the parties basically say, I have to leave. And when they leave, then they come back after 5 minutes and they sit down again. So parties basically like to test the water to the extreme. Okay, so I think the challenges are you have to make sure that parties are comfortable with you. You have to do that very quickly. They understand that, and they basically do not dominate the process, because I've seen sometimes lawyers will dominate the process. Not all, some lawyers are very good, but some lawyers will dominate the process, and basically the clients will eventually feel upset about it and they'll say, please, Mr. Lawyer, keep quiet so I can actually answer the mediator. So you don't want to put the lawyer into that situation. So the chances are, if that happens, you have to manage it very effectively. So I think managing people is much more difficult than actually doing your work in terms of preparing for a case in court, because you do not know what to expect from them. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, doctor. Thank you. Doctor, next question is from Mr. Sanjeev Nirvani. This is more kind of a practical question, doctor, and it's really interesting that the question is, India does not have any law governing mediation. This makes it very easy for either party to refuse execution of the signed settlement. India does have a law governing conciliation. So the mediation is interchangeably used with the term conciliation. Would not be in the fitness of the things to use the conciliation as the Arbitration and Conciliation Act instead of not so effective mediation?
Now, in Hong Kong, before we had the mediation law in Hong Kong, we had an arbitration ordinance whereby we used the word conciliation. My understanding of conciliation is much more to do with the mediator would give advice throughout the process. And I think if you try to give advice and your advice is wrong, there could be lots of issues in terms of, for example, negligence. That's why in Hong Kong, we've decided now the parties are in control. So we have to use this term called mediation. So mediation is, we tend to use the word term called facilitative. So if you want mediation to work, I truly believe, you cannot force someone to do something. Just like a kid, if you ask them to do their homework, they will rebel. But if you say to them that it's very important, you try yourself, you do it yourself. If you don't like it, don't do it. What will happen is the kid will realize that, for example, if they don't do the homework, if they want to go into become a lawyer, if they don't do the homework, they'll fail. So the kid is voluntarily deciding to, oh, I need to study now. So chances are you need to actually make them sort of in charge and say to them, you decide, you tell us what to do. Now, of course, it's very difficult. It's much better to have a stick rather than a carrot. Okay, you hit someone. If you don't do something, then you have a stick to hit you. But a carrot is much better as well, sometimes I believe, because people are willing to come to the settlement terms, and you actually honor the settlement terms, from my belief so far doing it. Because I find that the ones who are much more voluntary tend to settle much more effectively and also honor settlement terms.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you for answering this question. And doctor, the next question is from Ms. Jo Mani. The question is, would you agree that a mediator does not have to be an expert in the subject matter of the settlement?
Now, the chances are you have to be a bit careful, because I tend not to do medical disputes. Why? Because medical disputes, the terms, sometimes the parties have to spend a lot of time explaining it to me. And I did one before, and what happens is I spend a lot of time going through the medical dictionary to understand what are these terms. Because the reason is because when it's a medical negligence claim, both sides are having medical experts there. They're going to actually talk about these terms, and you're sitting there as a mediator, you don't understand a single word they're saying. And you say, oh, how can we prevent this from happening? Is there ways to prevent this? Not. So that's why in some disputes, I believe you need to have some kind of expertise. You don't have to have solid expertise in that area, but in some disputes, commercial settlements, if you're a good commercial lawyer, chances are you don't really need to have the background information relating to those. So certain disputes, you might need to have expertise, but not to an extreme. But in other disputes, you could be a general mediator, and you could be able to actually handle the cases much more effectively. I'll give you an example. I currently do a lot of family mediation, even though I haven't trained or qualified as a family mediator. But the problem is, if you ask most of the lawyers in Hong Kong, they give me a lot of cases about family disputes involving family children and divorces and so forth. But the key thing is, that's easy to manage because you don't have too much technical jargon. In other disputes, you do have a lot of technical jargon, and for you not to be familiar with it, that could be a problem as well, because the parties will be looking at you and saying, this guy doesn't know what we're talking about. So how is he going to help us? Okay?
Yes, Doctor, thank you. Thank you for answering this question. Doctor, the next question is from Ms. Stefano Catalini, and the question is, whatever this is more like opinion-seeking question, and I just read the question here, Doctor. What are the step clauses with 3 steps? Negotiation by senior managers, mediation, and finally arbitration. In such a case, the mediation will be normally compulsory. Is the intent it is to try to avoid the cost of the arbitration? Now,
this is what we'll call, for example, a multi-tiered dispute resolution clause. I quite like these as well, but it really depends. If people are using the mediation purely because of a procedural aspects in the contract, the chances are this might not be effective. So if you are putting a multi-tiered dispute resolution clause into your contract, you have to make sure that all the parties on board will honor its obligations in terms of following through and doing this negotiation, mediation, and arbitration. Now, my experience, even though I like arbitration a lot, my experience is arbitration is becoming much more expensive. It is not cheap anymore. And when I was doing it, and in the good old days, I can tell you when I started off doing it, people would say arbitration is cheaper than courts. But now if you ask people about arbitration, it could be as expensive as court litigation. So chances are, if you don't want mediation to be like that as well, the chances are you need to actually make an effort to control it, to make sure it works. If not, you go to an arena, then you have arbitration. Now, some of you might say, oh, don't worry, we have third-party funding. Okay, we have all this. But at the end of the day, okay, if the funders are willing to fund you, great. If they're not willing to fund you, what do you do? So you have to give it a try. Do I have the money? The key thing is, when you do arbitrations, I've done cases before as counsel, whereby the client says, I want to go to arbitration. And I says, do you have the funds to do it? And they say, yes, 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 yes. Halfway through, our arbitration case had to stop because we didn't have the funds to pay it. So I said to the client, what do you want to do now? Well, let's try mediation. Go back to mediation again. Another side said no. And they insisted to go to arbitration. So the client was stuck. So the chances are, if you believe that you don't have the resources to continue with arbitration, you might as well give it a good go in the mediation to try it. That's what my views are.
Thank you, Doctor. In line with that, we have one more question from Mr. Abhinandan. The question is, if all the parties are not ready for whatever the options that we're generating, like we discussed in the last questions, like how should the mediator face this challenging situation? How to convince them and how to pull them to a way as a mediator?
I think the mediator will basically try his best. I think I can't really say there's a right or wrong answer. and things, because mediation, you don't have black or white. It really depends on the case scenario, the case. So the mediator can guide them. The mediator can be like, for example, sometimes we call the backseat driver. He can actually give them some hints. By the end of the day, the parties are driving the car. So whether they want to go right or left or reverse or forward is up to the parties. So the chance that mediator can actually be like the backseat driver, giving them advice in the sense that, hey, you might as well want to take this. Think about it. If you don't, the chance that there could be consequences. But if you do it this way, there could be consequences as well. So give them a lot of options. I rephrase again. Not really, I mentioned advice, but in a way, suggestions, options for them to consider. If I turn right, if I turn left, if I go straight away, what are my options and what is the benefits that I should be adopting from each? Hope that helps.
Yes, Doctor. I think
I'm trying to answer it very quickly.
Yes, Doctor.
So many questions.
Yes, Doctor. And we have one more question to prove that you're not a sexist anyway. The question is, do you think the gender would affect the result of being a mediator in different mediation cases?
Can you repeat that again? I can't hear.
Do you think gender would affect the result of being a mediator in different mediation cases?
As I said, I do a lot of family mediations, and most of the ones who appoint me tend to be the females. I don't know why. So the chances I get a lot of female of appointing me in family mediations. So I think in terms of gender, I would say it plays some element. Why? Because if you're in a family mediation, if you basically are a female, you are more comfortable with a female mediator, because at the end of the day, they can look at it from your point of view. But some mediators disagree. I've talked about the subject before. Some females disagree. They believe that having a female basically might not look at it from their point of view, might be more harsh. So having a male might be better. So it depends on the situation. And but just looking at it from a general perspective, if I was going through this kind of situation, I would feel more comfortable. If I was a female, I would feel more comfortable having a female mediator, because I feel, for example, she might be looking at it from my point of view as well. Likewise, the gentleman as well. The gentleman might say, hey, I want a male mediator, because he might be much more sympathetic from my point of view. That's family. But in the big commercial world, and the problem is, okay, I'm wearing my hat as the Institute of Directors now, so I can tell you, many of the boards around the world, when they talk about diversity, they talk about, yes, they give you a sort of a story, yeah, we've got diversity. But when you look at their boards, I'm not trying to be sexist again, but if you look at the boards, if you have 12 people on the board, you only have 2 females and 10 are basically, for example, all male. And if you look down to a gender in terms of age, chances are, I was the youngest, I'll tell you, I was the youngest to be appointed as the director of the Hong Kong Institute of Directors. So you can imagine, I'm the youngest on my board. So you can see, for example, I think it's not just about having a more mature mindset, but sometimes you need to have a younger generation on your board to give you a perspective. What does other people feel about this? If we adopt technology within the company, what does the younger generation and company employees look at? So we ask a younger board member, what do you think? What do you think they will do? Will they embrace it? How should we do it? What about the older generation? Will the older generation adopt IT? How should we address that? So in a way, if you have a balanced mix of board members, chances that's better. Same with mediation. It's difficult to have a balance, but sometimes we tend to have this term called co-mediation, whereby you have females and males involved. Okay. Now, the other question that most people ask me, are females better at mediation compared to males? The chances are it depends on the case. It depends on the person. Okay, some male mediators are very good, and some female mediators are very good, but some male are really bad. They just go through the motion, and some females are the same as well. So the chances are is the characteristics. Now, if you look at international arbitration, not many of the international arbitrators are doing mediations, but some arbitrators are doing mediations, and you can see some are just pulling mediation. So you can see that you as a dispute specialist, you have to have the skill sets in place so that if a client or clients need you, you have the skill set available. You can't just say to them, sorry, I'm a specialist in arbitration. You can't come to me for mediation, but I'll recommend someone else. But both parties says, we like you. We want you to do mediation. So I think you need to get trained. So I believe that any kind of dispute resolution, okay, the processes, the theories. We can all learn it. I just let you know, I failed my driving license 4 times. Does it mean I'm a bad driver now? The answer is no. It's just practice. The more practice you do, the better you become. Now, most people believe that it's difficult to get some cases. Yes, but that's why universities, student unions, student associations should be creating clinics or certain areas whereby people can use your services and you can get trained. Sometimes you're helping the community as well. I've answered in a very long question, okay? But the question is very short, but the answer is very long. I hope it helps.
Thank you, Doctor. We have hardly 5 minutes. I'll just ask one last question. The question is from Ms. Kavita Balakrishnan. Do we need mediation law? Are we compromising the flexibility aspect with the mediation law?
Now, it comes back to this issue about a mandatory or requirements. Now, most people are comfortable with if there's set laws or procedures in place, they feel much more comfortable. Because they always believe that I'm honorable, I want to resolve it through mediation, but other people are not so honorable, they don't want to resolve it, they're just wasting time and resources. So in a way, the law is there, but the law has to just be the framework. In our law in Hong Kong, the mediation law, we only said about communication, confidentiality aspects. We talked about what can you be disclosed and not disclosed. The other documents that basically we have is what does the mediator need to do? What are the attributes, characteristics of the mediator? What skill sets does he need to have? And also on top of that, we talked about is the government, when there's in mediation involving the government, is the government bound? We have it in our law in Hong Kong, it says that the government is bound to do mediation as well. So you can see that our mediation law in Hong Kong is very thin, not a lot, okay, of meat. But it gives some substance to feel, so people feel comfortable. If they go through a process, this process is legitimate. This process has some backing of the state, and the state basically is trying to move you down. And I think access to justice, that's very important. Remember Lord Wolf in his report, how mediation came about, access to justice. If justice is taking a long time to be served on the public, the chances are what will happen is they become disillusionized. So if you have a quick way of getting a result, even though you might not like it, but it's a halfway between liking and not liking it, it's better than nothing else.
Thank you, Doctor. We have one interesting question, actually. We'll just wind up with that last question, Doctor. Doctor, India is a signatory to the Singapore Convention, but in the absence of a law on a mediation that makes mediator settlements executable, how effective would be this Singapore Convention?
I think in terms of effectiveness, it depends on the jurisdiction. I understand there are 3 jurisdictions who have now agreed to adopt it within their own law. I'm hoping that other jurisdictions will do the same. Now, this will have some challenges towards arbitration. If we move towards this and every single jurisdiction adopts it, the chances are people will believe that the mediation settlement agreement will have legal force. So they might not want to go into the arbitration mode. So they could have some knock-on effect on arbitration. So that's very important. So I think the key thing is, can we embrace mediation with arbitration together? And I think long term, I believe we can. Okay, but in short term, if everyone adopts it, the case law for arbitration might drop, the case law for mediation might increase. But eventually, you'll balance it off. Certain types of disputes are more suitable for mediation, and certain types of disputes are more suitable for arbitration. I hope I've answered that question.
Yes, Doctor. And thank you, Doctor, for answering this question. And thank you, Mr. Jawad AG, for asking such an interesting question. And thank you, Doctor. I hope this was really an interactive session. With that, I'll hand over to Mr. Svethan to proceed on.
Thank you again, Dr. Christopher To and Mr. Shanmuga Dev. I would like to ask Mr. Inbavijayan to deliver the vote of thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Christopher. I think a lot of thanks to you because you have highlighted the entire about commercial mediator. Even though you have started your career, I think in your presentation also you are happy to say that you started with the arbitration and then the convenience and the comfort and the acceptable level, you just moved to mediation. It's really good. And I think it's a good takeaway for all the participants. And very interestingly, there are more than 40, I think around 44 questions. Anyway, it will be taken to kfcri.adr@gmail.com, and it will be shared to you so that we can get your valuable response to those questions, and we'll ultimately reach to the participants who have raised valuable questions.
No, delighted.
Yeah, it is really an eye opener after the Singapore Convention, because the Singapore Convention is going to explore and explode to a maximum level, bringing mediation law in various jurisdictions, like how the New York Convention promoted the concept of arbitration from 1958. This convention of the Singapore Convention of 1920, obviously it's going to facilitate the mediation in the coming months or even years. And with this note, I think a huge thanks from KFCRI. Anyway, you are part of KFCRI.
Yes.
And we are going to just explore a huge market, particularly the ADR market, starting with mediation and arbitration, as well as conciliation to some extent, because India has even a good say about conciliation when it comes to labor disputes. And I think it is a good beginning for KFCRI to get your advice. Under your guidance, we will take this mediation to the maximum level, not only for the students, for practitioners, as well as professionals from various domains. Thank you. And I'll request Swethan to give the closing remarks.
Thank you, sir.
I can say thank you very much.
Again, very warm regards and thank you to Dr. Krisvatho, Mr. Shanmuga Dev, and Mr. Inbavijayan. The webinar was quite interesting and engaging, and we've been getting feedback already. So a bit of logistics before we go. The recorded version of the same webinar will be posted on the YouTube page of KFCRI as well. Apart from this, you will be receiving updates regarding to the other webinars which we'll be conducting. I would like to happily say that this will be the conclusion of the April webinar series of KFCRI. More details regarding the May webinar series will be sent to you via all the participants and others via email. Apart from this, KFCRI will be also conducting its first ever online accreditation programs in both arbitration, mediation, and other areas, for which I would like to direct you to the website of KFCRI as well. Moment.
You can see it.
Yeah, it is displayed, Swethan, it is displayed in chat.
So you can see this. You can go to the KFCRI page, that is www.kfcri.org, and go to the top bar where accreditation is shown, and you can choose which field of ADR which you would like to be accredited in. For example, if you want to get accredited in the associate level of arbitration, you can choose associate under the arbitration tab, where you'll be directed to this page. But you will find the details of the course as well. But these details will be the direct live program. If you click the register now button at the bottom of the page, we'll be sending you the details of the online program as well. There will be no payment required at the starting of the registration. We will reach that regarding the payment details as well through mail. I guess that's it for the logistics part. I thank you. It's my warm thanks to every participant from all around the world. It is our utmost pleasure to conduct this, and thank you, Dr. Krisvatho, again.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, KFCRI, and thank you for my other co-speakers for their kind remarks, and also for inviting me to speak. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you, Doctor.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Doctor. Have a good day too.
Thank you very much.